The gallows stood like a black skeleton against the pallid light of morning. A thin wind rolled through the main street of Redford Crossing, hissing through gaps in warped clapboard walls and setting the hanging rope to sway, creak by slow, deliberate creak. Folks had been gathering since before sunup. Farmers in mud-caked boots, women clutching shawls against the cold, a handful of cowhands leaning lazy against fence rails, but keeping their eyes sharp. The smell of dust and horse sweat carried under the pale sky. Elias Turner stood on the platform, wrists bound in coarse rope, the noose heavy at the base of his throat. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, with a beard grown wild from weeks in the sheriff's cell. His eyes, gray as creek rock, moved over the crowd without hurry. He saw no friend among them. The sheriff, a blocky man with a jaw like an anvil, stood to his left, one hand resting near his Colt. He read from a folded paper in a flat voice that carried easily in the quiet. Theft of property, murder of a rancher by the name of Cletus Raleigh, sentence of death by hanging. The words slid past Elias without catching. He had heard them before, in the echoing dark of the jail, and again in his dreams. What he heard now was the sigh of the rope, the murmur of the crowd, and somewhere far off, the thin cry of a hawk. In his mind, though, there was another sound entirely, the shallow, strained breathing of two children in a freezing shack high in the foothills, and the rasp of a voice that had begged him to bring food home, no matter how. Memory came sharp as a knife, the biting wind tearing through the gaps in the cabin walls, the small fire dwindling to embers, his boy's lips tinged blue. He'd left before dawn, rifle slung over his back, snow crunching under worn boots. Hunting had turned up nothing. By mid-afternoon, he had crossed into Raleigh land. The cabin stood empty, smoke curling from the chimney's last fire. Inside, shelves lined with tins, sacks of flour, a slab of bacon hanging from a hook. He had just filled his pack when the door burst open. Cletus Raleigh's bulk filled the frame, shotgun already leveled. Elias had thrown up his hands, words spilling fast, his kids were starving. He'd pay back every crumb. Raleigh didn't answer. His finger tightened on the trigger. The crack of a gunshot still rang in Elias's ears. Only it hadn't been Raleigh's gun. The scene in his head dissolved as the sheriff reached the last line. "Any final words?" he asked, turning his head just enough to look Elias in the eye. Elias's jaw tightened. Final words? For a town that had already judged him guilty before the dirt had settled over Raleigh's grave? He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a voice, clear and cutting as a bell in winter, sliced through the murmurs. "He saved me." The crowd stirred, heads turning toward the street. A wagon rattled to a halt in the churned dirt, pulled by a weary bay mare. From the driver's bench, a woman climbed down. She moved with care, one hand resting on the swell of her belly beneath a worn calico dress. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face, but her voice carried again, strong and steady. "He saved me." The sheriff's brow furrowed. "Ma'am." "I'll speak," she said, stepping forward. Her boots sank into the mud, but she didn't slow. By the time she reached the base of the gallows, the crowd had gone near silent. Elias stared down at her. He didn't know her, couldn't place her face, though there was something about the shape of her jaw, the steady set of her eyes. "What is this?" the sheriff demanded. "My name's Clara Whitfield," she said, breath clouding in the chill air. 2 months back, my husband and I were driving cattle east of Dry Fork when we were set upon by 3 men. They shot my husband. They would have killed me too. But this man," she looked up at Elias, "this man came out of nowhere and drove them off. He saved my life." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A ranch hand spat into the dirt. Someone muttered about lies to save a killer. The sheriff shifted his weight, uneasy under the eyes now turning toward him. "That may be so, ma'am, but it don't change what he's charged with." "It should," Clara said. "If you hang him, you're hanging an innocent man." A man near the back shouted, "Then how come Raleigh's dead?" Clara's gaze swept the crowd. "Because someone wanted him dead, and they wanted Elias Turner to take the blame. I saw the kind of man he is, and it's not the kind who shoots another in cold blood." Elias felt the rope tug against his neck as he lifted his chin. He didn't know what game she was playing, but there was steel in her voice. Still, he'd learned not to trust anyone offering sudden kindness. Not in these parts. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. "We've got a verdict from a jury, ma'am." "Then you've got a wrong one," Clara said. More murmuring. The air between the platform and the crowd seemed to thicken. A few townsfolk nodded at Clara's words, others crossed their arms and glared. "Sheriff," came a voice from the left. It was Judge Paxton, the old man standing stiff with his hands clasped over his cane. "Maybe we ought to hear her out proper." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the rope, at Elias, at the woman standing unflinching in the mud. "You've got until sundown," he said finally. "That's all. If you can't prove he's innocent by then, the hanging goes forward." A wave of noise swept the crowd. Some relief, some disappointment. The sheriff motioned to his deputies. Elias was hauled down the steps, the noose yanked from his neck, but the rope still binding his hands. Clara stepped back as he passed, her eyes meeting his just long enough to spark something he couldn't name. Back in the jail, the light slanted through barred windows, striping the rough plank floor. The sheriff tossed Elias into his cell and locked the door with a loud clank. "Sundown," he said and walked out. The room smelled of iron and damp wood. Clara appeared not long after, her dress marked with travel dust. The deputy at the desk gave her a hard look, but said nothing as she approached the bars. "Why?" Elias asked before she could speak. "Because you saved me," she said simply. "I don't remember you." "You weren't saving me for thanks," she said. "And I'm not here for gratitude. I'm here because the man who really killed Cletus Raleigh is hunting me too. If you hang, the truth dies with you." Elias leaned back against the wall, studying her. "You're asking me to believe you're doing this for justice. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to help me get where I need to go," she replied. "And where's that?" "North," she said. "My father's place. If I make it there, I'll be safe until the baby comes." The scrape of boots outside drew both their eyes to the window. Across the street, 3 hard-looking men had taken up position in the shade of the Mercantile's awning. They were watching the jail with the stillness of hunters. Elias's mouth tightened. "Friends of yours?" "No," Clara said. "Friends of the man who killed Raleigh." For a long moment they just looked at each other. The light outside was shifting toward afternoon, shadows stretching long across the street. Elias felt the rope burn at his neck again, even though it was gone. Sundown wasn't far. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse snorted. The wind rattled the jailhouse door in its frame. Elias knew the day wasn't over, not by a long mile. The sun had sunk low enough to bleed its light through the dust that hung in the street. Shadows of the gallows stretched long and thin, pointing like black fingers toward the jail. Inside, the air was close, heavy with the scent of stale tobacco and iron. Elias sat on the cot, wrists still bound, listening to the distant thud of boots on wood as the town moved toward evening. Clara stood by the barred window, one hand pressed absently to her belly as she kept watch on the men outside. "They're still there," she said without turning. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then you'd best tell me, quick, why I should walk out of here with you, instead of letting the rope settle the matter." "Because if you hang, the man who killed Cletus Raleigh wins," she said, her voice even but edged. "And I die before my child is born." He studied her. The last hours had been a churn of suspicion and unanswered questions, but there was no mistaking the steadiness in her eyes. Still, the world had taught him hard. Steady eyes could hide the sharpest lies. "What do you want?" "I want you to get me to my father's homestead, 2 days' ride north in the breaks. You know the country. You can keep us alive." Elias gave a short laugh without humor. "You want a man half the town's ready to hang to play trail guide? I want the man who drove off 3 killers when he had nothing to gain," she said, turning to face him fully. "You saved me once. Save me again, and I'll swear before the judge what I saw that night. You didn't shoot Raleigh." A flicker crossed Elias's face. Surprise, maybe, but it was gone quick. "And you waited till now to say that?" "I waited because I had no choice. I've been running since the day it happened, watching every ridge for riders, every doorway for shadows." Her jaw tightened. Those men outside, they're not here to scare you. They're here to finish me. Elias leaned back, rope creaking under his wrists. The truth or a shape of it was in her words. He could feel it. But truth wasn't always enough to keep a man breathing. The jail door groaned open, and Deputy Ames stepped in, shutting it behind him quick. His hat was low, eyes flicking toward the street. Sheriff's at the gallows getting things set. I don't like the way them fellas are watching. If you two are fixin' to clear out, it's now or never. Clara moved first. You'll help us? Ames hesitated, jaw working. I ain't saying I believe either of you, but I don't take to hired guns standin' in my street like they own it. I'll open that back door, give you a head start. After that, you're on your own. Elias rose. You'll need to cut me loose. The deputy's knife made quick work of the rope. The feel of blood returning to his fingers was a sharp, welcome ache. Ames handed him a revolver. Elias took it without question. The back alley behind the jail was narrow and choked with shadow. Elias led, Clara close behind, her breath quick but steady. The dirt here was soft, muffling their steps. They slipped past the livery, past a stack of rain-swollen barrels, then out into the far end of town where a lone buckskin gelding and a battered mule were tied. These'll do, Elias said, swinging into the saddle. He reached down a hand and hauled Clara up behind him before turning the horse north. The mule followed. Lead rope knotted to the saddle horn. They kept to the river flats, letting the noise of the town fade behind them. The first mile passed in silence, but for the creak of leather and the rush of water beside them. Clara's hands were tight at his waist, her body swaying with the gelding's stride. You been in these parts long? Elias asked finally. Long enough to know the law don't always keep you safe, she said. He didn't push further. The river bent west, and they followed until the light bled out entirely, leaving only the pale wash of moon across the sandbars. Elias found a stand of cottonwoods and swung down, leading the horse into the shadows. We'll camp here, he said. She slid down without help, though her movements were stiff. Elias unsaddled the gelding, ground-tied the mule, and coaxed a small fire to life with twigs and dry grass. The glow painted her face in soft gold, the lines of strain etched deep despite her calm. You planning to ask me more? She said, watching him over the flames. I'm planning to keep us alive till morning, he replied. Questions can wait. Her gaze didn't leave his. They'll find us before that if we stay here too long. They'll find us faster if we ride all night and kill the horses, Elias said. Rest while you can. She drew her shawl close and lay down on one side of the fire. Elias sat with his back to a tree, revolver in hand, eyes scanning the dark. Somewhere far off, a coyote sang to the moon. The hours passed in thin sleep and quiet watchfulness. Just before dawn, Elias caught a flicker of movement at the edge of the trees. He was on his feet. In an instant, gun leveled. A figure froze in the half-light, then melted back into the brush. The rustle of retreat was quick, deliberate. They found us, Clara said, already rising. Elias doused the fire with a bootful of sand and had them mounted within minutes. They rode hard for the hills, the river falling away behind them. By midday, the land had risen into rolling breaks, gullies twisting like scars across the earth. It was there they reached the river crossing, swollen with spring melt, the water dark and swift. Clara's eyes widened at the churn. We can't. We have to, Elias said. He dismounted, checked the cinch, and led the gelding into the current. The water surged against his thighs, cold enough to bite. The horse fought for footing, and halfway across Clara slipped sideways, nearly torn from the saddle by the pull. Elias was there in an instant, hauling her upright with a curse. They staggered onto the far bank, dripping and shivering. Clara sank to the ground, clutching her belly. Elias knelt beside her. You hurt? She shook her head, teeth chattering. Just cold. He built a fire in the shelter of a rock outcrop, his hands moving quick and sure. She warmed in the glow, watching him. Why are you helping me? She asked softly. Because I don't take kindly to being strung up for another man's crime, he said. And because I reckon you're telling the truth. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Cletus Raleigh wasn't killed over you stealing food. He was killed by his own brother. Over land, cattle, money. I saw it happen. That's why they want me dead." Elias's gaze held hers. "Then we'll see to it you live long enough to tell it." Before she could answer, the crack of a rifle split the air. The shot punched into the dirt near Elias's boot. He shoved her down behind the rocks as another shot rang out. 3 riders were coming fast from the south, guns spitting fire. Elias drew and fired back, the report echoing through the brakes. 1 rider went down hard, tumbling in a heap. The other 2 wheeled and split, one circling wide. "They'll pin us in," Elias said. "Stay here." He darted from cover, moving low, the gelding's reins in hand. Swinging into the saddle, he spurred uphill, cutting across the second rider's path. The man fired wild, missing by a yard. Elias's return shot took him in the shoulder, sending him spinning from the saddle. The third rider turned tail, pounding back toward the flats. When Elias returned to the outcrop, Clara was on her feet, revolver in hand. Her knuckles were white around the grip, but her aim was steady. "They're not going to stop," she said. "No," Elias agreed, "they're not." He glanced at the sky, already paling toward evening. "We push on tonight. The sooner we reach your father's place, the better our chances." She nodded, slipping the revolver into the pocket of her dress. As they mounted up again, Elias looked once over his shoulder down toward the open country. Somewhere out there, the rest of the hunters were still riding, and the rope in Redford Crossing was still waiting. The wind picked up as they rode north, carrying with it the scent of rain. The land ahead was rough, cut deep by canyons and lined with the black ribs of dead cottonwoods. The trail would be harder now and the night longer. But Elias knew one thing for certain: whatever lay between here and that homestead, they'd have to ride through it together or not at all. The rain came in hard before nightfall, sweeping across the high breaks in silver sheets. Elias and Clara rode, with heads bent, letting the storm wash the dust from their faces. The trail had narrowed to a crooked thread along the edge of a ravine, slick with mud and rimmed in loose stone. The wind carried a low, restless moan through the canyons, and every now and again the mule's nervous bray broke the sound. They'd made camp in the lee of a red rock bluff, the fire built small to keep from drawing eyes. Elias crouched by it, stripping water from his coat. Clara sat on a folded blanket, her dress clinging to her from the crossing earlier. Her face was pale, but set, the sort of look Elias had seen in men about to ride into a gunfight. "You haven't slept proper since we left," he said. "Neither have you." He shrugged. "I've been hunted before. Makes a body careful." Her gaze stayed on the flames. "When I saw Cletus fall, I thought the world had turned inside out. My husband was dead not an hour before, and now the man who'd ridden with him was bleeding into the dirt. His brother," she stopped, swallowed. "He didn't see me. I was behind the wagon. But I heard him tell the others to blame it on you. Said you'd been on Raleigh land before, that you were already half outlaw in people's eyes." "That part ain't wrong," Elias said. "I've taken what I needed from men who could afford the loss. But killing in cold blood? That ain't my hand." "That's why I came to Redford Crossing," she said, lifting her eyes to him. "Not just to save you. To save myself. If they silence me, the lie stands." The firelight caught the wet in her hair, turning it to threads of copper. Elias looked away first. "Then we best keep moving." By dawn the storm had blown itself east, leaving the sky clean and cold. The ground was soft underhoof as they pressed into the broken country, the gullies deepening, the grass giving way to scrub and stone. Clara rode, the mule now, her hands resting on the horn, her posture straight despite the fatigue etched in her features. Elias kept his eyes roving, watching the ridges for any flicker of movement. Near midday, the trail leveled out into a shallow basin dotted with cottonwoods. Elias reined in. Smoke curled faintly from the far side, thin and pale, but enough to twist his gut. He swung down, motioning Clara to do the same. "They're ahead," he murmured. "Could be your father's place. Could be trouble." They led the animals along the basin's rim until the cabin came into view, small, weathered, with a stone chimney puffing a lazy thread into the air. A man sat on the porch, rifle across his knees. His hair was silver, his back straight despite the years. Clara's breath caught. "Pa," she said and started forward. The old man stood as they approached, his eyes narrowing, rifle rising just enough to remind a stranger he knew how to use it. When Clara came into the open, he lowered it fast, striding to meet her. They embraced, the years and miles falling away for a moment. "You're early," he said, his voice gravel deep. Then his eyes flicked to Elias, hardening. "And you've brought company." "This is Elias Turner," Clara said. "He's the reason I made it here." The old man studied Elias for a long moment. "Name's Josiah Whitfield. You've got the look of trouble about you." "I've had the look put on me," Elias said evenly. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Josiah poured mugs and listened while Clara spoke. She told him of the ambush, of her husband's death, of Raleigh's murder, and the lie that followed. Elias said little, letting her words fill the space. When she finished, Josiah leaned back, the mug cradled in both hands. "I fought at Shiloh. Learned then a man's life can be ruined quicker by lies than by bullets. If you're set on clearing his name, you'll need more than your word." "His brother will be in town," Clara said. "If I speak before the sheriff, if I name him, you'll paint a target on yourself bigger than the one you already carry." Josiah cut in. "I'm already hunted," she said, "and I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Elias met her gaze. "If we do this, it's got to be now. Before they get wind of where you are." Josiah sighed, setting the mug down. "Then I ride with you. If this comes to a fight, you'll need another gun." They left before first light the next morning, 3 riders moving fast down the Basin Trail toward Redford Crossing. The wind was sharp, cutting through coats and scarves, but the pace kept them warm. Elias's mind turned over the likely shape of things. Riders posted outside town, the sheriff caught between law and loyalty, townsfolk hungry for spectacle. They came into Redford Crossing at dawn's edge. The street was half awake, doors swinging open, the smell of frying bacon drifting from the hotel kitchen. The gallows still stood, dark against the sky, and there, near the saloon, a knot of hard men waited. Elias slowed the gelding, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. Clara rode beside him, jaw set, Josiah just behind. The men stepped into the street as they passed, blocking the way to the jail. "Where you headed, Turner?" one called, voice oily. "Past you," Elias said, a smile without humor. "Sheriff ain't looking to hear from you. Best turn around." Clara urged her mule forward, speaking loud enough for those on the boardwalk to hear. "I've come to give testimony about the murder of Cletus Raleigh." The effect was instant. Heads turned, whispers swept the street. The sheriff himself came down off the gallows, hand resting on his sidearm. "Clara Whitfield, you're supposed to be gone from here." "I've been running long enough," she said. "The man you have been protecting is a murderer." She pointed across the street, past the sheriff, to a heavy-set man with a trimmed beard and eyes like burnt coal. "That man, James Raleigh. He killed his brother." James Raleigh's face stayed smooth, but his hand twitched toward the revolver at his hip. The sheriff hesitated, torn. Then Raleigh moved. The street erupted, gunfire cracking, people scattering. Elias was off his horse in a heartbeat, shoving Clara behind a water trough. Josiah took cover near the post office, his rifle barking. Raleigh's men fired from a saloon porch. Elias returned fire, dropping one. The sheriff was shouting for order, but the fight had taken on a life of its own. Raleigh tried to push toward Clara, a pistol in each hand. Elias stepped into his path, their shots crossing. Raleigh staggered, a red bloom spreading across his coat. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the clatter of a dropped gun. The sheriff moved in, kicking Raleigh's pistols aside. "Is it true?" he asked, looking from Clara to Josiah to Elias. Clara's voice was steady. "I saw him do it, and I'll swear it in court." The sheriff nodded once, grim. "Then he'll stand trial." By mid-morning, the bodies had been cleared and the crowd had thinned to murmurs. Elias stood on the boardwalk, watching as deputies led Raleigh away in irons. Clara joined him, her hand light on his arm. "You're free now," she said. He glanced at the gallows. "Free enough." Josiah came up, adjusting his hat. "You've got no reason to stay in Redford Crossing. My place has room. Could use a man who can shoot straight." Elias looked at Clara. Her eyes held something softer now, though the steel was still there. He thought of his children's graves, of the rope that had nearly ended him, of the trail still unspooling ahead. "I'll think on it," he said. As they mounted to leave, the sun broke through the clouds, laying gold across the street. The gallows cast no shadow now, the rope swaying idly in the breeze. Elias turned his horse north, the sound of hooves fading into the open country. Behind them, the town settled back into its rhythm, but the story of the morning would carry far, and somewhere in that wide land, others would hear it and know. The truth had found its way to daylight.